Hello and welcome to another tier list video. Today we are taking a look at the Marvel superheroes. Now, I don't have every single hero good guy on this list, but I do have the majority of them, and I've seen pretty much every single Marvel movie with the exception of Thor: The Dark World and the new Captain Marvel. So I'm going to be doing my best to rank all these characters, not necessarily how strong they are, but just how much I like them in the movies, how much do I enjoy them as a character. And I will say I haven't seen the newest Marvel shows, so keep that in mind when you're considering my list. But starting us off, we have Iron Man, Tony Stark. As I mentioned in my Marvel movies tier list, Iron Man is my favorite superhero. Iron Man 1 is one of my favorite superhero movies in general. And for me, I just love Iron Man. I love him as a hero. I love how, his powers aren't really some, random thing that happened to him. He chose to become Iron Man. He chose to build the suit and change, what he was doing. So, Iron Man, across all the movies, I just think he's a great character. I love his style. I think he's a great addition to the cast, and definitely going to be in the S tier for me. Up next, we have Captain America, which, to be honest, I was not a fan of Captain America in the early movies. I was not a fan of the first Captain America movie. I liked Captain America Winter Soldier as a movie, but even there, Captain America himself I wasn't the biggest fan of. And I would say up until maybe Infinity War was when I really started to like Captain America. I felt like in the early movies he was a bit too much of a Boy Scout, goody-goody, always just trying to be the good guy. I like to have my characters, have a little bit of flaw in them, be a bit of a rebel sometimes like Iron Man is. And Captain America was just not that in the early movies. So in the early movies, I would honestly have put Captain America, I know this is going to upset some of you, but I would have put him down in the D tier. But in Infinity War and Endgame, he's definitely an A tier for me. So it's going to kind of average out between C and B tier. But I think because he's so good in the later movies, he'll find himself solidly in the B tier. Up next, we have Bruce Banner. Now I'm going to do Bruce Banner and the Hulk as separate characters because while yes, they're the same person, the personality is really quite different, but I am going to be keeping in mind that, it's really just one person. But Bruce Banner, I really like Bruce. I think he's a really interesting character, a lot like Tony Stark, super smart guy. He's got good comedic relief sometimes. Overall, just a really fun character in the show, and he's going to find himself in a solid A tier. And then Hulk alongside him, I kind of have to tie him at least a little bit. I will say, you don't really see too much of Hulk's personality in the movies. I would say Thor Ragnarok was the first one where they really showed, Hulk as a personality, beyond just I'm angry all the time and want to destroy everything. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then of course we get the Professor Hulk in the, the Endgame Infinity War series, which it was a bit interesting, but I still prefer Hulk as either I want to smash everything or as Bruce Banner. But Hulk also going to find himself in the A tier. Up next, we have Nick Fury, who, well, I wouldn't really consider him to be a superhero. He doesn't have powers or anything. He's kind of the one behind the scenes, organizing the Avengers. He's the first one to put them together. And I would say he's a pretty interesting character. I do know that you supposedly learn a bit more about him in the Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show, which I haven't seen, but I really wish we would have gotten to know a little bit more about Nick Fury just from the movies. I think his character really could have used a bit more development. Overall, I think he's interesting, but to be honest, just looking at the movies, I don't really feel like he adds a whole lot. There's a couple movies where he plays a bit more of an influential role, but to be honest, I think his role as Nick Fury is a bit inconsequential in a lot of movies. If you took him out, I don't really think the movie would be much better or much worse. So Nick Fury, he's not bad, but he doesn't do a whole lot for me. Gonna find himself in a low C tier. Up next, we have War Machine, who is kind of the militarized version of Iron Man. Of course, played by, I guess not the actor, but the character is Rhodes. And I would say he's a pretty interesting character. We get to see a little bit into him in the Iron Man movies, but I would say for the most part in the Marvel movies, outside of the Iron Man movies, he's not really a super important character. He's just kind of almost a sidekick to Iron Man sometimes. I will say he's pretty cool, but overall, we don't really see too much into his character. They don't really do a whole lot of development. He's more of like a sidekick superhero, definitely not one of the main ones that you know, we don't really learn a whole lot about his background. So for that reason, you know, he's cool looking. I think the War Machine Iron Man suit is actually cooler looking than the regular Iron Man suit. But character-wise, he just doesn't do enough for me, and he's also going to find himself in the C tier. Up next, we have Black Widow. Now, honestly, I have not seen the Black Widow movie yet. It just came out about a week or two ago. So I do plan to see it at some point, but as of right now, I'm just ranking Black Widow based off what I've seen of her in the, particularly the Avenger movies. I know she makes an appearance in, Iron Man 2 maybe. But overall, as a character, I think she's interesting, but you could argue she has a superpower with, like, you know, her fighting abilities, but I would say she doesn't really have a superpower. And character-wise, I don't really think she's that interesting. To be honest, I find her a bit annoying in some of the movies. She's definitely cool, but honestly, Black Widow, not really doing a whole lot for me either. Gonna find herself in the C tier. Up next, we have Thor, who honestly, in the early movies, you know, Thor 1, the first Avengers, even Civil War, I was not really a fan of Thor. I felt like he was, like, so egotistical, so caught up in his own mind about being a god. Honestly, I was really not a fan of him at all. But then later in the movies, especially I would say from Thor Ragnarok and on, Thor quickly became one of my favorite characters. I went into Thor Ragnarok not expecting to like the movie because I didn't really like Thor. I thought, you know, this will be okay for a Marvel movie. But I loved it. And I felt like in the later movies, we really got to see a bit more of Thor's personality. And Infinity War and Endgame Thor are fantastic. I will say I wasn't a huge fan of the bro Thor, but Infinity War Thor especially, I thought was so cool. And while the early movies, I would have put Thor in, honestly, probably an F tier. He would definitely be an S tier for the last couple movies. And, you know, you would say maybe that averages out to a B or C tier, but I think he's so high in the S tier for me that he's actually going to find himself in the A tier just because I love him so much towards the end of the movies. Up next, we have Loki, who, you know, you can say he's a villain, depending on which movie you're watching. Even in the later movies, he's not always a good guy, but for the most part, in the later movies, you know, he is working for himself, but also working for the good guys. But honestly, I think Loki is an incredible character. I think he's really interesting. You know, you get to see a lot of his development over the series, and I'm really excited to watch the Loki TV show. I've not started it yet, but I have heard good things. And Loki is a character in the movies. I think he's a great villain in the first Avengers, and I think he's a great kind of sort of hero, sort of still a bad guy in the later movies. So Loki gonna find himself up in the A tier as well. Up next, we have Valkyrie, who is a hero that we first see in Thor Ragnarok, and honestly, I think she's super cool. She clearly just, like, doesn't really care, kind of in it for herself, but also still being a good guy when the task arises. I wish we would have learned a little bit more about her backstory because I think she is a very interesting character, but still going to find herself in a solid B tier. Up next, we have Hawkeye. Honestly, Hawkeye is a guy I wish we would have learned a little bit more about his backstory as well. You know, I'd literally never heard of him as a superhero until I saw the first Avengers movie. And he's another one, kind of like Captain America, where I feel like he's, like, too much of a good guy, doesn't really have a flawed character in the early movies. But then as we see, you know, in the later movies, especially something like Endgame, we really see his darker side, and I think that's really interesting. You know, I don't exactly know, you know, the background behind him using the samurai sword or the katana in Endgame, but I thought that was pretty sweet. I wish we would have seen more of him using that. In the later movies, definitely more of an interesting character. Gonna find himself in the B tier. Up next, we have Bucky. Honestly, I'm not really a huge fan of Bucky as a character. He just seems kind of like so gloomy and depressing all the time, and admittedly, he has been through some crap, and you know, he probably deserves to be a bit depressed, but honestly, as a character, I've just never really been a fan of Bucky. Even in the later movies, never really did it for me. Gonna find himself down in the D tier. Up next, we have Falcon. Honestly, another character which I don't really love too much. You know, he's there, but he doesn't really do much for me. He's kind of just like a sidekick to Captain America, in my opinion. And I suppose, you know, after Endgame, he is the new Captain America, but never really been a fan of Falcon myself. He just doesn't really add much to the plot, much to the story. Definitely not like comedic relief or anything like that either. So Falcon gonna find himself down in the D tier. Up next, we have Peter Quill, kind of a streak of low characters for me. I am not a huge fan of Peter Quill's character. He's like for me, he epitomizes a teenager becoming a superhero, and he's clearly just not ready for all of his responsibility. He doesn't really have good control of his emotions, which you can see in the Guardians of the Galaxy movie, and especially Infinity War. Honestly, when they're literally about to rip off Thanos' gauntlet on Titan, and Peter Quill screws it all up. And honestly, just not a huge fan of his character. Really annoying, really whiny. Peter Quill, gonna be in the F tier for me. Up next, we have Gamora. I would say a pretty cool character. Gets mad at Peter Quill a lot, and I would say rightfully so. Honestly, I think she's a pretty cool character, though. Definitely a bit flawed, which is something I like in a superhero. Overall, I would say she's just a pretty good character, both in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies and the Avengers movies. I think she's definitely an interesting character, and it adds some decent value, but nothing too crazy, but enough to find herself in the B tier. Up next, we have Nebula. Honestly, this lady is like the angriest person ever in pretty much every movie until the last couple. But honestly, I think she's a decent villain when she is a villain, and I think she's a decent hero when she is a hero. But doesn't really play either role super well for me. Overall, a decent character, but not my favorite. Gonna find herself in kind of a low C tier. Up next, we have Mantis. Mantis is creepy. Put her in the D tier. That's enough to say about her. Up next, we have Rocket. Now, Rocket is easily one of my favorite characters in the franchise. Every single time he's on screen, he's funny, he's cool. Rocket, easily my favorite character from the Guardians of the Galaxy, and one of my favorite Marvel characters in the entire franchise. Definitely going to be in the S tier for me. Up next, we have Drax, which honestly is another great character. He's got some great comedic relief moments. For me, Drax has some of the highest highs when it comes to just comedic relief moments that you're not expecting to be funny, but Drax is just like, and his character is like not even trying to be funny, but he's just hilarious. Drax, definitely a solid character, gonna find himself up in the A tier. Up next, we have Groot. Honestly, Groot, he's kind of the mascot of the Guardians of the Galaxy, I would say. He's a cool character, plays some important roles in some of the movies, but you can only do so much as like a character who doesn't really speak. He's cool, don't get me wrong, I like Groot, especially Baby Groot. But honestly, as a character, you can only do so much when you're not able to actually communicate effectively, just without just saying, my name is Groot. But overall, still a good character, but he'll only find himself in the B tier. Up next, we have Yandu, who's from the Guardians of the Galaxy 1, and honestly, I thought he was a great character in that. Another guy who we see as a villain and then also later on as a hero. Honestly, I think he's a really cool character, really interesting. We see a lot of depth even just from one movie, and he's definitely going to find himself up in the A tier. Up next, we have Wanda, of course, one of the, if not the most powerful Marvel character in the entire franchise. And, I think she's pretty cool. Her powers are really awesome when she's putting them on display in the movies, but as a character, we don't really see too much into her backstory. I know that they go a lot into that in the WandaVision series, but like I said, I haven't seen many of the TV shows yet as I don't have Disney+. But I will watch them at some point for sure. But Wanda, from what I've seen, a cool character, but not really doing anything too crazy for me. Just going to find herself in the C tier. Up next, we have Vision. Another character which, like I said, I haven't seen the WandaVision franchise yet, so I don't have too much background into Vision outside of what we've seen him in the movies. But overall, I think he's a pretty cool character. Definitely an interesting take on a superhero, not really being a real person, more so being, I'm not even sure exactly what you'd call it, the spirit of the stone, basically. But overall, I think he's a pretty cool character. We don't really see exactly what his powers are in a lot of the movies, but overall, Vision, I think he's a pretty cool character and gonna find himself in the B tier for me. Up next, we have AntMan, who, in terms of power, really uncertain in a lot of times. Sometimes he seems like he's super strong, other times it seems like he's pretty weak. But AntMan is a character, I love him. I think he's super funny. The AntMan movies, I had low expectations going in, but they were really funny when I actually watched them. So AntMan, gonna find himself up in the A tier. Up next, we have Black Panther, which was another movie that I didn't really know what to expect going in. I'd never heard of Black Panther really until he showed up in Civil War. But I was intrigued by Civil War, so when I watched Black Panther, I was kind of excited, and it did not disappoint. The Black Panther movie was great. I thought it was really cool seeing the origin story of the Black Panther. And just as a superhero, I think he's awesome. I think his costume looks really cool, which is something I always look for. And overall, just a really solid character. Gonna find himself up in the A tier as well. Up next, we have Spider-Man, which honestly, I was not super excited when I heard they were bringing Spider-Man into the Marvel franchise. I know he's a Marvel superhero, but we've already had like so many other Spider-Man franchises with, you know, Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield. I was like, really? Another Spider-Man movie? But I was super impressed. I think the Spider-Man character just fits perfectly into the Marvel franchise. I thought they did a great job. You know, both Spider-Man movies are really good. He does a great job in the Avenger movies as well. Spider-Man, great character, great superhero, just fit in perfectly for me and really impressed me. Definitely going to be another S tier. Up next, we have Doctor Strange, which was another character that I'd literally never heard of before until I saw the first movie, so I didn't really know what to expect. I thought, you know, how are they going to implement sorcery and magic in the Marvel franchise? Does that really fit? And when I watched the movie, I was really impressed. I thought Doctor Strange is a really cool character. I love the movie. I think he fits in really well in the franchise. For me, honestly, one of my favorite characters as well. Gonna find himself up in the S tier. Up next, we have Wong, yet another person who's going to find himself in the S tier. I absolutely love Wong. Every time he shows up, he's so funny. Definitely my favorite character in the Doctor Strange movie. I'm really hoping he's going to be in the second Doctor Strange movie as well, because he's just fantastic. Every time he's on screen, one of my favorite characters. Definitely not a main character, I would say, but he is awesome. Wong, going to be in the S tier for sure. Up next, we have the Ancient One, another one from the Doctor Strange universe, and she makes an appearance in Endgame as well. I would say definitely a pretty interesting character. I wish we got to know a little bit more about Ancient One, because I think, you know, she's definitely a cool character, but I really want to know what her backstory is, you know, how she became the Ancient One, things like that. But definitely an interesting character when we see her, but we just don't really see her enough to find herself higher than a B tier, so that's where she'll sit for me. Up next, we have Captain Marvel, which, as I said, I have not seen the Captain Marvel movie, so I can't really give a great rating on her. So take my ranking of Captain Marvel with a heaping of salt. But honestly, when I saw her in the the Endgame movie, I was really not a huge fan. I felt like she was kind of, I don't know, almost just like a bit whiny, a bit of a brat a lot of the times. Like, I felt like she was a bit full of herself, so I wasn't a huge fan of her. Not a terrible superhero, but I felt like she was a little overpowered and honestly just kind of annoying. So Captain Marvel actually going to find herself down in the D tier for me. Well, that's my list. Let me know your guys' thoughts, and I hope you enjoyed.